The mountain road twisted through the thick forest, climbing higher and higher. Clouds hung low, and the trees seemed to close around the old truck as it bumped along the narrow track. Inside the truck, Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his eyes searching for the cabin he remembered from his childhood. He had not been back for years, not since his parents sold the place. Now, the cabin belonged to him, and he hoped it would bring him the peace he could not find in the city. The world was quiet here, the only sound the wind moving through the tall pine trees. As Ethan finally saw the old wooden cabin standing in the mist, he felt something deep in his chest. It was a strange mix of excitement and worry. He parked the truck and stepped outside, breathing the cold, fresh air. He looked around, half expecting to see someone or something moving between the trees, but the forest was empty. The cabin looked almost the same as he remembered. The paint was peeling, and moss grew thick on the roof. A wooden deck stretched across the front, creaking under his boots as he walked to the door. Ethan unlocked the door and pushed it open, the hinges making a long, sad sound. He stepped inside, feeling a shiver not just from the cold, but from something else, something he could not explain. Inside, the air was heavy and still. Old furniture, set covered in dust, and spider webs hung in the corners. Ethan dropped his bag on the floor and opened the curtains, letting in the pale gray light. He walked from room to room, remembering summers spent here as a boy, fishing in the river and hiking the trails. Now the cabin felt different, like it was waiting for something or someone. As evening fell, fog thickened outside, wrapping the cabin in a soft, silent blanket. Ethan lit a fire in the old stone fireplace and unpacked some food. He cooked a simple meal and sat near the fire, watching the flames dance. He felt the tiredness of the long journey pull at him, but he could not shake the strange feeling in his chest. Then, just as he was about to close his eyes, he heard a noise. It was soft, almost like a whisper, coming from the kitchen. Ethan stood up, listening, his heart beating faster. He walked slowly into the kitchen, but saw nothing, only the pale light coming through the window. He checked the back door, but it was locked. Maybe it was a mouse, he told himself, or just the wind. But later, as he went to wash his plate, he noticed something odd. Some of the bread he had left on the table was missing. He looked around, feeling the hair rise on the back of his neck. Had he eaten more than he thought, or was someone else in the cabin? That night, sleep did not come easily. The cabin creaked and groaned, and every small sound made Ethan sit up in bed. At one point, he thought he saw a shadow move across the living room. He sat perfectly still, his eyes wide in the darkness. But when he turned on his flashlight, the room was empty. In the morning, the mist was even thicker, hiding the world outside. Ethan made coffee and sat by the window, watching the fog move through the trees. He tried to laugh at his own fear, telling himself it was only his imagination. But when he went to get his boots by the door, he found muddy footprints leading across the wooden floor. They were not his. They were smaller and shaped differently. Ethan knelt down to look more closely. The footprints glowed faintly blue, as if painted by light instead of mud. He touched them and felt a strange, cool tingling on his fingers. He stood up quickly, looking around the cabin. He called out, "Is anyone there?" But his voice sounded small and lost in the empty house. He searched the rooms, opening every closet and looking under the beds. He found nothing but dust and old memories. Yet the strange feeling would not leave him. He could not explain the glowing footprints, or the missing bread, or the shadow he saw in the night. That evening, as the sky grew dark and the mist wrapped tighter around the cabin, Ethan decided to stay awake. He wanted to see if the stranger would return. He turned off the lights and sat quietly near the window, watching and waiting. The hours passed slowly, and the forest outside was silent. But deep in the night, Ethan heard footsteps on the porch. Light and careful, he held his breath as the door handle turned slightly, but did not open. In the faint firelight, he saw a shape move across the window, a tall, thin figure with silver hair. When Ethan moved, the figure slipped away into the mist, leaving only silence and a single glowing blue feather on the doorstep. Ethan picked up the feather and felt a cold thrill run through him. He knew at that moment he was not alone in the cabin, and whoever or whatever was out there was watching him, waiting in the mist. The morning after Ethan found the glowing blue feather, the mountain cabin felt different. There was a feeling in the air, like a secret waiting to be discovered. Ethan could not forget the image of the tall, silver-haired figure slipping away into the mist. He held the feather in his hand, turning it over and over. Its glow softer in the daylight, but still shining with a strange blue light. He wondered if it was real or just a trick of his tired mind. He cleaned the muddy blue footprints from the floor, but the memory of them would not leave him. Outside, the fog was so thick that the trees looked like tall ghosts, their shapes lost in white mist. Ethan's heart beat faster every time he heard a creak or a whisper from the walls. Was the stranger still nearby, watching him from the shadows? He decided to learn more about the visitor. He set up his old camera near the window. Pointing at the porch, he left some bread and fruit on the kitchen table, hoping the stranger might return for food. Then he hid in the storage room, peeking through a crack in the door. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock and the wind moving through the trees. Hours passed and nothing happened. Ethan started to feel foolish, thinking maybe it was all a dream. But just as the sun began to set and the forest filled with golden light, he heard footsteps, soft and careful. He held his breath, trying not to move, as the cabin door creaked open. A shape moved quietly through the hallway. It was the same tall figure he had seen last night, wrapped in a gray cloak, with hair like silver moonlight. She stepped into the kitchen, her movements quick and careful. She glanced around nervously, her eyes glowing blue in the fading light. Ethan stayed perfectly still, watching as she reached for the bread. She took only a little, eating quickly and silently. Then she touched the feather on the table, pressing it to her heart for a moment. A soft humming sound filled the room, and the feather glowed brighter in her hand. Suddenly she froze, as if she sensed someone watching her. Her eyes searched the shadows, and for a moment, Ethan thought she saw him, but instead, she backed away, moving toward the door. Before she left, she placed a strange object on the table, shaped like a small crystal, pulsing with blue light. As soon as the door closed behind her, Ethan came out of hiding. He picked up the crystal, feeling it warm and alive in his hand. When he looked outside, the stranger was gone, lost in the swirling mist. That night, the cabin felt even more mysterious. Ethan placed the crystal on his bedside table. Unable to stop staring at its gentle light, he wanted answers, but all he had were questions. Who was this woman, and why was she hiding in his cabin? What secrets did she carry, and what danger did she fear? He watched the footage from his camera, but the screen showed only shadows and a blur of blue light. No clear image of the stranger, only hints of movement. Ethan began to realize that this was not just a lost traveler. This woman was hiding from something, maybe even from someone. As he lay in bed, Ethan heard a whisper outside his window, a voice speaking words he could not understand. He closed his eyes, listening to the strange, haunting sound. He promised himself that he would find out who she was and what she wanted. He felt that his quiet days in the mountains were over, and that a new strange adventure had begun. Deep in the night, the blue crystal shone brighter, filling the cabin with soft, dancing lights. In the glow, Ethan dreamed of stars, of faraway worlds, and of eyes watching him from the darkness of the forest. He woke before dawn, the feather and the crystal glowing beside him. The hidden stranger was out there somewhere, and Ethan knew he had to find her before someone or something else did. The sun barely touched the mountain cabin as Ethan woke from a restless sleep. The blue crystal still glowed softly on his bedside table, lighting the room with gentle waves of color. Outside, the mist was thinner, but the world still felt quiet and secret. Ethan knew today would be different. He was tired of waiting, tired of feeling watched. He wanted to meet the stranger, to understand the mystery that now lived in his cabin. After breakfast, Ethan wrapped the blue feather in a cloth and placed it in his pocket. He took the crystal too, slipping it into his jacket. He thought about the way the stranger moved fast and careful, always watching the shadows. He wondered where she hid during the day. The forest was huge, full of places a person could disappear. Still, something told him she was close. Maybe closer than he guessed. He spent the morning outside, pretending to chop wood but really listening. Every sound caught his attention: the crack of branches, the call of a bird, the rush of wind. He moved quietly around the cabin, peering into the shadows between the trees. It was almost noon when he heard a soft voice. Not far away, he turned, heart beating fast. There, behind a fallen log, he saw her, tall, thin, and strange, with silver hair that shone in the sunlight. She did not run this time. Instead, she crouched low, her hands raised, showing she had nothing to hurt him. Her blue eyes were wide and full of fear, but also hope. Ethan raised his own hands, showing he meant no harm. They stood like that for a long moment, two strangers in the quiet forest, not speaking, barely breathing. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to know who you are." The woman did not answer right away. She looked at the blue crystal in his hand, then at the feather. She nodded slowly, as if these things were important. Then she spoke, her words slow and careful, her accent soft and strange. "Safe, you are." "Safe." Ethan smiled and took a small step closer. He saw her hands were shaking, her skin almost glowing in the dappled sunlight. She seemed not just afraid, but tired, like she had not slept for days. He wanted to help her, but did not know how. He remembered the food she had taken, the bread and fruit. He reached into his bag and pulled out an apple. Holding it toward her, she hesitated, then took it with quick, graceful fingers. They sat on the mossy ground, Ethan careful not to move too fast. The woman ate the apple in small bites, her eyes always watching the trees. Every so often, she glanced at Ethan, studying his face. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely louder than the wind. "My name." "Alira." Ethan repeated the name, and she smiled, a small, shy smile that changed her whole face. Alira pointed at the blue feather in his pocket. She touched her own hair, and Ethan understood the feather came from her. It was not just a decoration, but a part of who she was. Ethan wanted to ask more questions, but before he could, a strange sound echoed through the forest, a low hum, growing louder every second. Alira jumped to her feet, fear flashing in her eyes. She pulled Ethan up and pulled him behind the log. "Hide," she whispered, her voice shaking. The hum grew louder, turning into a buzzing, as if 100 machines moved through the trees. Ethan's heart pounded as he saw shapes in the distance, dark figures moving between the trees. Alira pressed a small button on the crystal, and a thin shield of blue light flickered around them. They crouched together, barely daring to breathe. The figures drew closer, strange and tall, their eyes glowing with cold white light. Alira squeezed Ethan's hand, and he saw tears in her eyes. "Not safe." "They find me," she whispered. The dark figures moved past, their steps heavy and slow. Ethan did not move, did not speak. He waited, trusting Alira and the strange blue light. After what felt like forever, the forest grew quiet again. The humming stopped, and the figures disappeared into the mist. Alira let the shield drop, and for a moment, everything was still. Ethan turned to her, wanting to ask so many things. But Alira only shook her head, wiping her tears. "Danger," she whispered. "I cannot stay. They come again." She looked into Ethan's eyes, her own full of sadness and fear. She pressed the crystal into his hand, closing his fingers around it. Then she slipped away into the trees, leaving Ethan alone once more. But this time, he was not just curious, he was afraid. He knew now that the stranger in his cabin was not only lost, but hunted. And the danger in the mountains was just beginning. Ethan woke before sunrise, the blue crystal clutched tight in his hand. He had dreamed of Alera's frightened eyes, and the strange, cold light of the hunters moving through the forest. The cabin felt colder now, the shadows deeper, but Ethan knew he could not hide anymore. He had to understand who Alera was, and why she was being hunted. He packed some bread, a flashlight, and the blue feather into his backpack. He wrapped the crystal in a cloth and placed it in his pocket. Then, stepping out into the gray morning, he followed the trail into the woods. The mist curled around the trees, making the forest feel like another world. Ethan's boots left soft marks in the wet moss as he moved deeper into the silence. He moved slowly, stopping to listen for every crack and rustle. It was not long before he found more glowing blue footprints. He followed them up the side of the mountain, past rocks and twisted roots. The footprints stopped at a dark opening. Hidden by thick branches, Ethan pushed them aside and found a small cave. The entrance just big enough for one person. Inside, the air smelled cool and strange. A soft blue light shone from deeper in the cave. Ethan crawled forward and saw Alera, sitting cross-legged on the stone floor. Her eyes were closed, her silver hair loose around her face. Strange shapes floated in the air, made of blue light and symbols Ethan did not understand. He did not want to frighten her, so he spoke softly. "Alera, it's me, Ethan." Her eyes opened, and for a moment, she looked scared. Then she saw the blue feather in his hand and nodded. She pointed at the wall, where a metal box was hidden behind a stone. Ethan helped her pull it out. Inside, he saw broken parts, metal, glass, wires, and a device shaped like a small egg. Alera touched each piece with care, her face sad and tired. She spoke slowly, choosing her words. "My home, far, far from here," she said, her voice quiet. "Came by star. Ship fell. Broke. I hide." Ethan stared at the strange metal egg. He realized this was a piece of a spaceship. He tried to imagine how it fell from the sky and crashed in these lonely mountains. He wondered what it felt like to be alone, lost, and hunted on a planet that was not your own. Alera looked at Ethan, her eyes shining in the blue light. She took his hand and pressed it to the egg. Images flashed in his mind, dark space. Stars flying by, strange worlds, a storm of fire and light. He pulled his hand away, shaking from the vision. Now he understood a little more, but many questions remained. Alera showed him the broken technology. She used the blue crystal to power a small screen. Shapes and letters appeared, dancing in the air. Ethan could not read them, but Alera explained, "I send message. My people, maybe help, maybe come." Her voice trembled. "But hunters, not alone, not safe." Ethan promised to help her, even if he did not know how. He asked about the hunters, and Alera shivered. "Not from here, not like you. Follow my ship, dangerous." Her eyes filled with fear. "Want me, want power, take everything." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from outside the cave. Ethan's heart jumped, and Alera froze, her eyes wide with terror. They listened as heavy footsteps moved through the trees. Getting closer, Alera quickly covered the metal box and pressed her hand to the wall. The blue light faded, and the cave became dark. Ethan grabbed Alera's hand, and together, they crouched behind a large rock. The footsteps stopped right outside the cave entrance. A voice called out in a sharp, strange language. Ethan felt a cold fear. Knowing the hunters had found them, he held the blue crystal tight, its light growing warmer in his palm. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, the footsteps slowly faded away. The hunters searching elsewhere. Ethan let out a breath he did not know he was holding. Alera squeezed his hand, her own shaking. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Not safe. Must move, must hide." Ethan nodded, understanding now just how much danger they were in. As they left the cave, the blue crystal glowing between them, Ethan made a promise. He would help Alera fix her ship. He would protect her from the hunters, even if it meant risking everything. But as the mist closed around them, He wondered if help would come in time. The forest was never silent, but now every sound made Ethan's heart race. He and Alira moved quickly, keeping close to the thickest shadows everywhere around them. The fog made the trees look twisted and strange. The hunters could be anywhere. Hidden by the mist, Ethan held the glowing crystal tight, feeling its warmth in his hand. Alira walked just ahead, listening for danger, her silver hair tucked under her hood. The hunters were not like any people Ethan had ever seen. They were tall and thin, their faces hidden behind masks that shone with cold white light. Sometimes he saw them moving between the trees, almost floating, their feet never making a sound. They carried strange tools, black sticks that hummed in the air. Alira whispered that these tools could sense her energy if they came too close. The tools would glow red, and the hunters would know exactly where to look. Ethan's mind raced. He wanted to help, but the fear was always there. If they were caught, what would happen to Alira and to him? Alira stopped suddenly, holding up her hand. Ethan heard voices, not speaking any language he knew. The hunters were near, searching the woods, their white lights sweeping across the ground. Alira grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him behind a fallen tree. They lay flat, their faces pressed to the cool earth. A bright white light passed over them, but the hunters did not stop. For a moment, Ethan could not breathe. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. When the hunters moved away, Alira and Ethan crawled deeper into the forest. Alira pointed to a small, dark tunnel hidden under a pile of rocks. She slid inside first, and Ethan followed. Inside, it was cold and narrow, the air full of the scent of damp earth and moss. They crawled for what felt like forever, turning this way and that. Finally, they reached a larger space where they could sit up and catch their breath. Alira took out a tiny round object, no bigger than a coin. She pressed it to the ground and blew. Lines of light spread in every direction. Ethan watched as the light formed a moving map, showing the forest above them. Tiny red dots moved across the map, the hunters, searching, getting closer. Alira's face was pale, but her eyes were calm. She explained that her people used tunnels like these on distant worlds, places to hide from danger, to wait for help. Ethan realized this was not just a chase, it was a test of patience and courage. Alira listened to the echoes, feeling the tremble of footsteps above. They waited in silence. The only sound the quiet hum of the crystal in Ethan's hand. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a thin crack opened in the earth above. The hunters had found the entrance. Alira whispered, "Run," and started crawling down a side tunnel. Ethan followed, his heart pounding, every muscle tight with fear. The tunnel twisted and turned, deeper and deeper underground. The light from the crystal flickered on the damp walls. Behind them, they heard the strange whine of the hunters' tools. The ground shook as something heavy struck the earth above. Alira moved faster, whispering words in her own language Ethan did not understand, but he could feel her fear. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a hidden cave filled with glowing blue symbols. Alira stopped and touched the wall, and a doorway appeared, a round portal covered in light. She turned to Ethan, her voice urgent. "This is the way, my last hope." Ethan nodded, trusting her, even though he did not know what was. On the other side, just as they stepped through the glowing portal, a hunter's hand grabbed at Ethan's ankle. Alira pulled him free, the portal closed, and the cave went silent. Ethan lay on the ground, breathing hard. Alira pressed her hand to his and smiled. Even though tears filled her eyes, they had escaped. But the hunters would not stop, somewhere beyond the walls. The cold white lights moved through the darkness, searching, always searching. The world beyond the portal was nothing Ethan could have imagined. He blinked and stared at a sky that glowed deep violet, with 3 pale moons hanging above mountains of silver and glass. Strange plants grew everywhere, their leaves shining blue in the light. A cool wind moved through the air, carrying the sound of distant music. For a moment, Ethan forgot all fear. lost in wonder at this new place. Alara smiled when she saw his face, her eyes bright with hope. "This is my home," she said softly. Ethan stood beside her on the soft grass, looking around in awe. He had never seen a world so beautiful, so full of mystery, but behind them, the round portal still glowed, casting a faint light on the ground. Alara touched the blue crystal and pointed to a tall tower in the distance. "My people live there, maybe they can help," she whispered. But her voice trembled, and Ethan saw the worry in her eyes. He understood that even here, they were not safe. If the portal stayed open, the hunters could follow. Ethan watched as Alara pressed her hand to a small stone by the portal's edge. The light changed, swirling faster, but the portal did not close. Alara frowned, tapping on a device made from pieces of her crashed ship. She explained in quiet words that the portal was unstable. If it broke, they might be trapped forever, or lost between worlds. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed from the portal. A bright shape appeared, one of the hunters, its white eyes burning through the strange light. Alara gasped, stepping back. The hunter reached out, its hand crackling with energy. Ethan stepped in front of Alara, holding the blue crystal like a shield. The hunter spoke in a cold, broken voice. "Give her to us." Alara shivered, clutching Ethan's arm. Ethan's mind raced. He could not let the hunters take her, not after everything they had survived. He remembered the glowing blue symbols in the cave. He focused on the crystal, feeling it grow warmer. In his hand, Alara pressed her own hand on top of his, and together their touch made the crystal blaze with light. The hunter flinched, covering its face as the light grew brighter and brighter. The portal trembled, its edges sparking like lightning. Alara whispered, "We must close the door." Now, she showed Ethan where to press on the stone device. He followed her instructions, his hands shaking. The crystal grew hot, almost burning. The portal began to shrink, the light pulling inward, but the hunter lunged forward, trying to grab Alara. Ethan threw himself between them, using the crystal to push the hunter back. A wave of blue energy burst from the crystal, throwing the hunter away from the portal. Alara cried out, "Now!" and together, they pressed their hands to the device. The portal closed with a roar, leaving only silence and the sound of their heavy breathing. For a long moment, Ethan and Alara just stood there. They were safe, but stranded in a world that felt like a dream. Alara looked at Ethan, her eyes full of gratitude and sadness. "My people may be close, maybe help," she said quietly, "but hunters not give up. Must find safety, must move again." Ethan nodded, still holding the crystal. He knew their journey was not finished. Alara led him toward the shining tower, their shadows long under the purple sky. Behind them, the place where the portal had been was just empty air, but the danger had followed them, and somewhere, the hunters searched for another way through. Ethan promised himself he would not give up. He had crossed worlds for Alara, and he would help her find her way home. Together, they walked into the unknown, ready for whatever came next. Ethan and Alara moved quickly across the glowing fields. The tower grew larger with every step, shining bright under the 3 moons. Strange birds called from the silver trees, their voices echoing in the cool air. Ethan felt the blue crystal pulse in his hand, warmer than ever before. He knew the journey was not over. The hunters had failed to take Alara in the forest, but their hunger for her power had not died. At the tower gates, figures appeared. Alara's people, tall and graceful, with eyes like clear water. They rushed to her, touching her shoulders and face, speaking in gentle words. Alara smiled for the first time, her face shining with hope and relief. Ethan stood back watching, feeling both happiness and sadness. He knew he did not belong to this world, but he also knew he had changed. Alara turned and called to him, inviting him closer. Inside the tower, Alara's family listened to her story. They touched the broken pieces of her ship, their faces growing serious. One of the elders turned to Ethan and spoke slowly in English. "Thank you for saving our daughter. Your courage gave her light in the darkest time." Ethan nodded, not knowing what to say. The elder placed a hand on his shoulder. Now you must choose. Alara led Ethan to a high window below. The world glowed with blue light, rivers flowing like ribbons of glass. She looked at him, her eyes shining. Portal can open once more, she said softly. You can go home, safe, forget this. She paused. Or you can stay, help us. Fight the hunters, protect our world. Ethan stared out at the strange, beautiful land. He remembered his lonely cabin, the misty woods, the quiet nights. But he also remembered Alara's fear, the hunters, the feeling of fighting for something bigger than himself. He looked at Alara, her hand in his. In that moment, he knew what he wanted, suddenly. Alarms echoed through the tower, sharp and cold. A screen lit up with the face of a hunter, cold, white eyes burning with anger. The hunters had found another way through the worlds. Alara's people rushed to prepare, activating shields and lights that buzzed with power. Alara turned to Ethan, her voice calm but strong. Whatever you choose, I trust you. Ethan took a deep breath and looked at the crystal. He realized it was no longer just a tool, it was part of him now. He felt its energy inside him, strong and steady. He turned to the elder. I will stay, I will fight with you. Cheers and cries of thanks filled the room. Alara's hand tightened around his. Together, they ran to the tower gates, joining her people as they stood to face the hunters. Blue light flashed from the crystal, forming a shield around them all. The hunters appeared at the edge of the field, their masks glowing. But this time, Ethan was ready. He remembered everything he had learned about courage, about friendship, about hope. He stood with Alara, side by side, and raised the crystal high. A wall of blue light spread out, stopping the hunters in their tracks. The battle began, but now Ethan was no longer afraid. He knew he was home, not in a place, but with the people he had chosen. As the three moons shone down on the fields, the tower, and the world beyond, Ethan fought not for himself, but for a future where no one had to hide in the mist. Alara's people called him friend, and on some nights, when the wind blew just right, Ethan could still hear the call of Earth's forests in his dreams. But he smiled, knowing he had found his own new world, a world of light, courage, and endless stars. Asterisk.